By the time 1990 came around, the WWF had become the most appealing wrestling promotion for kids. Larger-than-life stars like Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage seemed to resonate well with a younger audience. The whole comic book character comes to life thing was capturing the imagination of kids across the world, and the WWF in general had done well for themselves by promoting these superhuman characters as their main event superstars. WCW, on the other hand, was going through a tough time with Jim Herd running the show. Herd was seemingly hell-bent on trying to compete with the WWF, while a vast majority of WCW fans were happy with how things previously were. Even going back to Jim Crockett Promotions, fans enjoyed the no-nonsense style of southern-based wrestling as a healthy alternative to the showbiz style of the World Wrestling Federation. But in terms of feedback, Herd simply refused to listen to both the fans and his roster of superstars. Herd tried to introduce some WWF-inspired gimmicks, and he tried to repackage superstars to be more kid-friendly, and they all fell flat. Instead of bringing in new fans, he done a lot to alienate the loyal supporters WCW once had, but it didn't matter. Jim Herd felt that the best way he could gain success was by copying the competition. The WWF's WrestleMania 6 event took place on April 1st, 1990 in the Toronto Skydome. Over 65,000 fans turned up to see Hulk Hogan versus The Ultimate Warrior, two larger-than-life wrestlers, two of the most popular superstars in WWF history, and two comic book characters that resonated with a younger audience. Needless to say, WrestleMania 6 was a huge success. The wrestling world was talking about Warrior versus Hogan, and WCW would have to come up with something special in order to compete with such a historic event. Simply put, WCW's answer was RoboCop. Yes, RoboCop. For those unaware, the first RoboCop movie was released in the summer of 1987, and it was awesome. Police officer Alex Murphy, played by Peter Weller, gets killed in the movie, but his body is converted into RoboCop, a cyborg that has three main objectives: serve the public trust, protect the innocent, and uphold the law. RoboCop then goes on a brutal and violent quest to erase crime, while memories of his past life start to slowly come back. Due to how graphic the original cut of the movie was, RoboCop was given an X rating 11 times. That's 11 edits that were all deemed too violent, but after the 12th cut of the film, RoboCop was given an R rating and the movie was released in cinemas. It was a commercial and critical success, but what's quite interesting though is that despite how brutal RoboCop can be in some places, it went over really well with younger audiences when it was eventually released on home media. I mean, just look at him. As a kid in the 80s, it would be difficult to not like a crime-fighting cyborg who kicked this much ass. RoboCop toys and merchandise aimed at children soon followed. A cartoon was released the following year. Kids just couldn't get enough RoboCop. When RoboCop 2 went into production with a release date of summer 1990, there was going to be some opportunities to do some cross-promotion, just like any movie really. WCW saw this opportunity, thinking that wrestling fans, traditional wrestling fans mind you, would like to see RoboCop in a WCW wrestling event. Right, now that that's out of the way, let's look at all the things that led to RoboCop showing up during a WCW pay-per-view event. The story really starts at the 1989 Great American Bash, when the man called Sting had a match with the Great Muta, and the Nature Boy Ric Flair put his NWA title on the line against Terry Funk. The Great Muta was undefeated in WCW at the time, so the TV title match pitting Muta against Sting was of high interest. In the end though, fans may have felt a little robbed with the finish. Sting performed a side suplex into a pinning combination and the referee made the 3 count, but Muta got a shoulder up before 3. Sting's shoulders were also briefly on the mat during the 3 count, and the final decision here was a draw due to a double pin. It was messy for sure. Muta left the arena with Sting's TV title, but this wouldn't be the last time we saw Sting or the Great Muta on this evening. In the Great American Bash main event, Ric Flair pinned Terry Funk Punk to retain the NWA Heavyweight Championship, but the Great Muta ran down after the match to attack the Nature Boy. The audience chanted for Sting to save Flair, and right enough, the Stinger made an appearance to help his old rival as the crowd went nuts. Ric Flair and Sting would team up against Muta and Funk at Halloween Havoc 89 in a Thunderdome cage match, which Flair and Sting won. This all led to the Stinger becoming a member of the Four Horsemen, a once very unexpected association for the man called Sting. There was an end goal to all of this though. In reality, Ric Flair had promised to drop the NWA Championship to Sting. Flair had a lot of respect for Steve Borden, and the two men had drew big numbers over the years. Flair gave his word backstage that the man who would defeat the Nature Boy for the championship would be the Stinger. The storyline would be simple. Sting becomes the #1 contender and a member of the Horsemen. The other faction members would demand that Sting gives up his right to face Flair, and when Sting refuses, he would get thrown out of the group. Flair versus Sting would then happen, with Flair being the heel and Sting being the babyface, and Sting then wins the NWA Championship. Everything was going to plan. Sting won a 4-man round-robin tournament at Starrcade that included a match against Flair in the main event, and because Sting won the tournament, he was named the #1 contender. At Clash of the Champions 10, the Horsemen demanded that Sting gave up his title shot, but Sting refused and he was kicked out of the Horsemen. Later in the evening though, there was some issues. Sting suffered a legitimate knee injury while interfering in the cage match main event that saw the Horsemen taking on the Gary Hart International faction, so Sting's title opportunity would get put on hold. So WCW's biggest babyface is now out of the Horsemen, and to top it off, he's also injured. Sting vs Flair was supposed to happen at Wrestle War in February of 1990, but Lex Luger took Sting's place. The match ended in a countout and Flair kept the title. The following month, the WWF put on their WrestleMania 6 event. WCW's next pay-per-view was Captial Combat, and now you have some context in regards to where WCW's main event picture was at the time. So that means it's now time for RoboCop, and RoboCop's main mission at Captial Combat was to take out the Horsemen on behalf of the Stinger. It sounds absolutely ludicrous because it was absolutely ludicrous. It's a crossover that never should have happened, but for whatever reason, the executives at Turner and Mr. Jim Hurt himself felt that a big-time Hollywood stunt like this would attract those younger viewers who bought into the RoboCop hype of the 80s. RoboCop 2 needed some more exposure before releasing in cinemas. WCW needed something, anything, to attract that young audience that the WWF had control of. And someone, somehow, somewhere felt that RoboCop in wrestling would somehow work. But in the end, it turned out to be one of those moments in wrestling that gets endlessly ridiculed, and I have to agree with everyone else here. This was WCW trying to get into that showbiz side of wrestling that the WWF were so good at, but even the WWF in 1990 wouldn't have went along with this. Keep in mind too what we talked about earlier. Generally speaking, fans of WCW liked the traditions of the NWA. In their eyes, this kiddie stuff belonged in the WWF. So the Stinger would tell Ric Flair and the Horsemen that they better watch out. RoboCop was coming for the boys. Promos would air on WCW television hyping the WCW debut of RoboCop at the Captial Combat show. I should note here too that Jim Cornette said that this was the original RoboCop actor wearing the costume, Mr. Peter Weller himself. This has also been contradicted by other reports, but I'm pretty sure it is actually Weller, and besides, Cornette doesn't have any reason to lie about this either. Jim Cornette also said that Turner Media owned the distribution rights to the RoboCop VHS release, and this is why they were eager to get RoboCop on a WCW show, just for more exposure. This is a fact that I've had real trouble trying to verify. The American VHS release shows movie studio Orient Pictures as the distributor for both RoboCop and RoboCop 2, while Columbia Pictures handled the majority of international releases. I'd be fairly confident in saying though that Turner Media must have had some sort of stake within the RoboCop franchise, otherwise WCW would have just went with a Turner license brand to save money. Maybe Turner secured the rights to broadcast the movie on cable television, I'm just not sure on this one. It's been said also that the decision to bring in RoboCop was made right at the top via Turner, and Jim Herd told his booking team to implement the character into the Captial Combat pay-per-view. Jim Cornette, who was on the booking committee at the time, said, "The pay-per-view was sold as The Return of RoboCop, and the advertising looked like the sequel to the movie. In the creative meetings, we were told that RoboCop can't do anything physical. In the suit, if he falls down, he can't get back up. He can't go upstairs, he can't go downstairs, he can't do anything." This, as you can imagine, presents a problem. Sting had been telling us all that RoboCop was coming after the Four Horsemen, yet RoboCop wasn't going to be able to do anything physical. No punching, no bumps, no pulling out a gun and blowing up Ole Anderson. The booking team had to come up with some sort of gimmick or stunt that would justify the Return of RoboCop tagline that WCW had slapped on the pay-per-view poster. So, at the show, before the RoboCop segment, the Midnight Express battled Tom Zank and Brian Pillman. To ensure that Jim Cornette wouldn't interfere on behalf of the Midnight, he was placed inside a small steel cage that was placed at ringside. The cage, however, had a second purpose. It was gimmicked for RoboCop. The bars were easily bent and the door would come off its hinges without much force, so Cornette had to stand inside the cage and not touch the tampered steel bars. Easier said than done when you're trying to get heat for yourself and for the tag team you represent. After the tag match was over, the cage was left at ringside. We went backstage where Gordon Soley told us that RoboCop had just arrived in the building and the footage got cut off as Sting's music began playing in the arena. Really, the whole thing was over in around 2.5 minutes, and it's incredible that such a short piece of WCW history is still laughed at to this very day. Sting comes out and he high-fives the little stingers in the audience. RoboCop then slowly makes his way out, but the Andersons and Sid Vicious attack Sting and throw him inside the cage that Jim Cornette had previously been in. RoboCop then walks over and he bends the metal bars before taking the cage door off its hinges, freeing the Stinger as the Horsemen run away. You'll see that the door actually opened before it got ripped off the cage, so all that careful planning around the gimmicked cage went straight out the window. RoboCop's costume also begins to fall apart. A piece of his leg opens up and it starts flapping about, and RoboCop also trips slightly on his way back up the rampway. So even if an appearance from RoboCop did somehow bring in more viewers, these new viewers would have seen RoboCop completely botching this appearance. Now, to give credit where it's due, the RoboCop appearance did get a pop, but that's as far as the praise can go here. It's quite shocking how fast it's all over and done with too. You'd think WCW would have milked it a little, but keep in mind that RoboCop couldn't do a thing in that costume. Even a basic task like walking made the costume fall apart. 2 more minutes and he probably would have been standing there looking like RoboCop from the end of the movie. The problem is though, is that fans were led to believe that RoboCop would be showing up to completely wreck the Horsemen, and instead he didn't lay a finger on them. So did it pay off? Did it do what it was supposed to do and get more young viewers watching WCW while also getting more people to see RoboCop 2 in cinemas? Well, not really, no. Captial Combat's buy rate was less than WCW's previous pay-per-view Wrestle War, and Captial Combat's buy rate was also less than WCW's next pay-per-view, the Great American Bash. In terms of making WCW more competitive with the WWF by targeting a younger audience, it did absolutely nothing. Nobody cared. The critically acclaimed first RoboCop movie grossed $53.4 million during its North American run in theatres, while RoboCop 2 2 grossed a total of $45.7 million. That's not too bad, but still it is a drop. And then on top of this, the reviews for RoboCop 2 were mixed. Of course, WCW couldn't do anything about that, but still, the magic of the first movie wasn't really caught in the second film. Personally, I think RoboCop 2 isn't bad, but I definitely choose the first movie over the second. Don't even talk about RoboCop 3. Not even this catastrophic blunder got Jim Herd removed from power because, well, it was a Turner decision. Eventually, Ric Flair got tired of Herd and he left for the WWF, taking the championship belt with him. Jim Herd wanted Flair to drop the title to Lex Luger, and Jim Herd also wanted Flair to cut his hair and call himself Spartacus. Just a small sample of how bad things would eventually get. The RoboCop deal, though, wasn't the first time this kind of crossover deal would happen, and it sure wouldn't be the last. Adam West's Batman made an appearance in Memphis. Chucky showed up in WCW to torment Rick Steiner while promoting Rick's brother Scott. Chuck Norris showed up in the WWF. Even the Muppets hosted an episode of Raw. The thing is, this kind of thing never really works. It's always seemingly done for the wrong reasons, and the ones who pay for it are the die-hard wrestling fans who just want to watch wrestling. Small cameos are one thing, but slapping RoboCop on the pay-per-view poster and promoting the event as the return of RoboCop is definitely taking it way too far. Maybe you're a fan of RoboCop and you came across this video and you've listened to some guy rip apart one of your favourite characters of the 80s. Trust me, I'm sure many wrestling fans growing up in the 80s were also fans of the RoboCop movies, and as mentioned, I loved the first RoboCop movie and I didn't mind the second, but even the most die-hard RoboCop fans out there have to admit that this was a bad use of an iconic character. I know for a fact that some kids would have been hyped to see RoboCop in WCW 2, there's no denying that, but on the grand scheme of things, it led to absolutely nothing but a moment in WCW history that we can now all laugh at. As always, thanks for watching.